He hit the ground hard. The sound of his body colliding with the marble floor echoed like a gunshot through the glass-paneled lobby of the Hyperion Conference Center. People turned. A few gasped, but most just kept walking. In a room filled with tech billionaires, venture capitalists, and influencers dressed like runway models, the older man in a wrinkled gray blazer looked wildly out of place, just another crank who got too close to the velvet ropes. Except he wasn't. The security guard who shoved him didn't ask questions. He didn't check credentials. He simply looked at the man, judged him by his clothes, and decided he didn't belong. "You don't just walk in here," the guard barked, his chest puffed with the kind of authority that feeds on appearance alone. The man didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He slowly pulled himself off the floor, brushing dust from his sleeve. Somewhere deep inside him there was a storm, but on the outside only a quiet kind of dignity. From the elevated stage 30 feet away, Elon Musk chuckled. It wasn't a laugh meant for amusement. It was a message, one of those smirks that tells everyone watching, "This guy isn't one of us." And just like that, the room swallowed the moment whole. No one asked if the man needed help. No one questioned why a guest, an invited guest, had just been shoved to the floor. They were too busy checking their phones, sipping imported mineral water, or adjusting their name badges for better selfies under the chandelier light. The man stood still for a moment, collecting not just his breath, but something deeper. Control. The kind of control you earn not in boardrooms or beta tests, but in battlefields of character. And that man, as it turns out, was Senator John Kennedy. He had been invited to speak, privately, quietly, by someone on Elon's own executive team. He wasn't there for publicity or to shake hands with crypto bros. He was there to deliver a short, 10-minute message about the human cost of innovation, about the people being left behind while machines take over. And yet here he stood, body sore, dignity bruised, surrounded by people who looked everywhere except at him. But what no one realized, what not even Elon saw, was that a 15-year-old boy near the back of the room had pulled out his phone the moment Kennedy was shoved. He had caught it all. The push, the stumble, the silence, and the sneer from the world's most watched billionaire. Now, you're probably wondering, what happens next? Why didn't Kennedy walk away? Why didn't he call for help, or at least demand someone be fired? Well, because that's not who he is, and because something bigger was about to unfold. Something that would turn a humiliating moment into a viral earthquake. But before we get there, I need you to do something. If you've ever seen someone mistreated and felt the weight of not speaking up, I want you to hit the like button. And if you've ever believed that one quiet voice can shake the world, type 9 in the comments right now. Trust me, when you hear what happens next, you'll understand exactly why this moment matters. Because within seconds, the lights in the room dimmed. The large digital screen behind the stage flashed names and faces for the surprise speaker segment. And there, in bold font next to a waving American flag, it appeared, Senator John Kennedy, keynote address, Humanity in the Age of AI. The audience froze. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Someone dropped their drink. Elon's face, once relaxed and smug, locked into something else entirely. Recognition. Not just of who the man was, but of what had just happened, of what the cameras had just captured, and of what was now spiraling completely out of his control. There was a beat of silence, an audible pause in the oxygen of the room as the crowd stared at the screen. Senator John Kennedy. The man who had just been thrown to the floor like an unwanted guest was, in fact, the man they were all about to listen to. The air shifted. Some people stood up straighter. Others exchanged glances that said, "Wait, that was him?" Elon didn't move. His smile, once playful and untouchable, had vanished into something tight around the edges. His assistant rushed toward him, whispering fast, frantic things into his ear, but it was too late. The name had already been broadcast. The truth had already arrived. Kennedy, still standing alone near the back, didn't rush the stage. He didn't let ego take over. He adjusted his blazer, straightened his spine, and walked down the center aisle with a calmness that didn't need to explain itself. The crowd parted for him, not because of who he was, but because of what had just happened. Their silence was no longer amused. It was unsure, uncomfortable. A man who had said nothing had just exposed everything. On stage, Elon Musk took a half step forward, trying to reclaim control with a joke. "Well, we're honored to have the senator here, though next time we'll send someone to escort you in." The line was meant to be light, dismissive, a brush-off, but it landed like a rock. The audience didn't laugh. Instead, the boy in the back, the same kid who had filmed the shove, stood up and raised his phone again. "It's already online," he whispered to no one and everyone. And he was right. By the time Kennedy reached the steps to the stage, the video of his mistreatment had already hit Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, with captions like, "They shoved a U.S. senator because he didn't look rich enough," and "Elon's event just exposed itself." Live, Kennedy turned toward the crowd before taking the microphone. The lights dimmed. A spotlight landed on him. But he didn't start with his speech. He didn't speak about artificial intelligence or policy or innovation. Instead, he looked into the sea of faces and said, "Before I begin, I'd like to thank your security team for reminding me why humility is the one technology we haven't figured out how to scale." The room held its breath. And then, as if a switch had flipped, the crowd erupted into applause, not out of politeness, but because they knew they had witnessed something real, raw, human. Elon stepped back into the shadows. The assistant who invited Kennedy had disappeared, likely already dealing with internal firestorms. But Kennedy didn't look at them. He looked at the audience, the engineers, the designers, the founders, the interns, and said, "I'm not here to lecture. I'm here because when you build something powerful, the first question you should ask is, who does this help, and who does it hurt?" And just like that, a conference that was supposed to be about algorithms and future markets turned into a reckoning about character. He told a story, not about data, but about a woman he met in Louisiana who had lost her job to automation, not because she wasn't smart, but because no one taught her how to adapt. She didn't need AI, he said. She needed someone who saw her. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't technical, but it landed deeper than any graph or sales pitch ever could. Then, something unexpected happened. From the far end of the room, a child's voice broke the silence. "You helped my mom," the boy said. It was the same kid who had filmed the video. "She told me you saved our house when no one else would listen." The audience turned to look. The moment froze. Simple, honest, and undeniable. Kennedy's face softened. He smiled, not for cameras, but because he remembered. "I didn't save your house," he said. "Your mom did. I just returned her call." And in that moment, the room wasn't watching a keynote. They were watching a shift. Power had moved, not through code or corporate deals, but through decency, through a man who didn't need to prove anything, because his actions already had. As the crowd rose to its feet, Elon stayed seated. Alone, his empire of perception cracking just slightly beneath the surface. Because no matter how many satellites you launch or empires you build, you can't outpace a moment of truth captured on camera and played back for the world to see. The standing ovation didn't fade. It rolled like thunder, rising in waves as Senator Kennedy stepped back from the microphone. Not because he demanded it, not because he asked for it, but because somewhere deep in their bones, the audience knew they had just witnessed something rare: authenticity. And in a world so polished and curated, that alone was revolutionary. Elon remained in his seat, hands steepled beneath his chin, his expression unreadable. Around him, his front-row entourage, tech moguls, crypto-evangelists, influencers in suits worth more than a car, glanced around nervously, unsure whether to clap, stand, or simply disappear. Kennedy didn't linger. He offered a polite nod and began to descend the steps from the stage when someone, an executive from one of Elon's companies, called out, "Wait, sir, please." The room hushed. The man approached with his phone in hand, showing Kennedy the trending video already climbing toward 1 million views. "You need to see this," he said. The video was simple. It opened with the push, Kennedy hitting the floor, the crowd ignoring him. Then it cut to the screen revealing his name, Elon's smirk, and finally Kennedy's speech, stitched together in a clean 90-second edit that hit the internet like a hammer. A caption underneath read, "The man they shoved just reminded us what grace looks like." Someone had added a quote overlay. "Power is how you treat people when you think you'll never need them again." Kennedy looked at it briefly, then handed the phone back without a word. He didn't need to relive it. He had lived it. In the hallway outside the auditorium, journalists had gathered like moths to a flame. Word had spread quickly. CNN, Reuters, BuzzFeed, even lifestyle YouTubers with millions of followers were live streaming from their phones. They weren't there to talk about AI. They weren't interested in Elon's keynote on Neuralink. They wanted to know how a sitting senator had been publicly humiliated and responded like a monk on a mountain. "Senator, do you plan to sue the organizers?" one reporter shouted. "Are you calling for Elon Musk's resignation?" another barked. "Do you think this event discriminates against people who don't look like Silicon Valley insiders?" Kennedy stopped. Slowly. He turned, not with anger but with clarity. "I'm not here to cancel anyone," he said. "I'm here to remind people that in the race to the future, it's easy to forget the value of the people beside us. The security guard? He made a mistake. But I've made mistakes too. We all have. What matters is whether we learn from them." He didn't give them the outrage they were fishing for. He gave them something better, something news couldn't edit for clicks. He gave them principle, a moral compass that didn't swing with the wind. Still, not everyone wanted to hear it. Inside the main hall, Elon had finally stood up. He walked toward the center of the stage, clearly rattled, and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "it seems we had an unfortunate misunderstanding earlier, but let's focus on why we're here. Technology that changes the world." There was polite applause, but it was thin, unsure, a shadow of the energy just moments before. He pressed on, launching into his prepared keynote with slides, stats, and projections of Mars colonies and brain-computer interfaces. But something had changed. People weren't watching with wonder. They were watching with skepticism. Their eyes flicked to their phones. The Kennedy video was still trending. "Pushed Senator" was now the top tag on Twitter. Reactions poured in. Celebrities posted the clip with captions like, "Dignity is louder than dollars." A former president shared it with the words, "This is what leadership looks like." Even Elon's own shareholders were privately messaging concern. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Halfway through Elon's keynote, the stage lights glitched. The screen behind him froze. A voice from the control booth called down, "Sorry, Mr. Musk. We're experiencing connectivity issues. Streaming bandwidth is maxed out. It's the Kennedy video. Every device in this building is playing it." The audience laughed, some nervously, some sincerely. Elon didn't. His jaw tightened. He looked out over the sea of faces and saw what every empire builder dreads: detachment. Not from technology, but from loyalty. Senator Kennedy, by now, had exited through a side corridor, but his words still hung in the room like gospel, and his presence, though no longer physical, had become something far more powerful, undeniable. Backstage, one of Elon's engineers turned to his colleague and whispered, "We built systems to change the world, but we just got reminded what kind of world we're changing it into." The other nodded, phone in hand, watching the video one more time. Not because it was viral, but because it made them feel something they hadn't felt in a long time. Something tech couldn't code. Something money couldn't buy. Respect. By the time Senator Kennedy stepped out into the cool evening air, the tech summit behind him already felt like a relic. Inside, they were still trying to reboot Elon's speech, trying to salvage the agenda, trying to steer the narrative back toward quarterly projections and innovation pipelines. But outside, the real story had already broken free. Protesters had begun gathering at the event entrance. Not angry activists, but ordinary people. A father holding his daughter's hand, a nurse in scrubs, a young coder wearing a hoodie that read, "Kindness greater than code." None of them planned to be there. They had just seen the clip online and felt compelled to show up. Kennedy paused near the curb, watching the small crowd grow. A few people approached him quietly, not for selfies, but to say thank you. One woman, voice trembling, whispered, "My husband served in Iraq. You wrote to him when he came home. No one else did." He smiled gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then I got something right," he said. Behind him, the media had followed like shadows, trying to spark drama, trying to corner him into outrage. But Kennedy kept walking. Not with urgency, with purpose. Back inside the building, Elon Musk stood backstage, pacing like a CEO under siege. He wasn't used to this kind of silence, not in his rooms, not from his people. The crowd had become uncooperative, distracted, disinterested. One of his PR managers approached, phone in hand, eyes wide. "You're being called out," she said flatly. "The media's turning on you, and it's not just them. Your own fans are doing it too." Elon snatched the phone. On Twitter, a viral thread read, "He built rockets to escape gravity, but couldn't lift a man off the floor." It had 2.3 million likes and counting. He scrolled further. A new video, just posted. A slow-motion montage of Kennedy's quiet resilience, set to swelling cinematic music. The top comment? "This is what grace under fire looks like." Dignity just walked past Tech's front door, Elon's face hardened. For a man obsessed with narrative control, this was uncharted territory. He grabbed a microphone and signaled the control room. "We're doing a press statement," he muttered. "Now." Outside, Kennedy had taken a seat on a low stone ledge beside the parking lot. The boy who had filmed the original video approached slowly, phone clutched tight to his chest. "Sir," he said shyly, "I think my video kind of went everywhere." Kennedy looked up, his eyes kind. "That's because you didn't look away," he said. "Most people do, but not you." The boy smiled. "My mom says people don't listen until they have to watch." Kennedy chuckled. "Your mom's smarter than half the Senate." Then, without warning, loudspeakers from inside the building crackled to life. Elon's voice rang out across the summit and into the night. "We regret what happened earlier today. We believe in inclusion, in innovation, and in learning from our mistakes. Senator Kennedy was treated unfairly, and for that I take full responsibility." It was carefully written, professionally rehearsed, but it lacked something essential: heart. Kennedy listened in silence. When it ended, a reporter asked, "Do you accept the apology?" He turned slowly, looking not at the camera, but at the boy beside him. "I accept that mistakes happen," he said, But I also know when someone's saying sorry because they got caught. And when they're saying sorry because they understand. The reporters scribbled furiously. But Kennedy wasn't done. The apology isn't for me, he added. It's for everyone who's ever been pushed down and told to stay quiet. We're not doing that anymore. And that's when it happened. The crowd around him, now doubled in size, began clapping. First quietly, then louder. And suddenly, the applause spread like wildfire. From inside the building, conference attendees began exiting, not because the event was over, but because they realized something more important was happening in the parking lot. Dozens gathered around Kennedy, then hundreds. Phones out, not to go viral, but to remember. A pop-up stage was rolled out. Someone offered a microphone. Kennedy took it. I didn't come here for attention, he began, but attention found us because of a truth we've ignored too long. We live in a world that celebrates how fast we can go, but we rarely ask who gets left behind when we take off. He scanned the crowd, finding the boy's eyes. The future isn't something we code, it's something we choose, and tonight, you all chose to pay attention. The final moment hit like a punch wrapped in poetry. A banner someone had made last minute was raised behind him. In black marker, it read, "We are not algorithms, we are people." And that truth, more than any headline or press release, became the new story. And while Elon Musk sat inside, staring at a frozen presentation slide titled, "The Future of Humanity," outside, humanity was already happening, without him. The sun had fully set, but the summit's parking lot was brighter than ever, lit not by stage lights or LED panels, but by hundreds of phone screens glowing like digital fireflies. Senator John Kennedy stood at the center, not on a pedestal, not behind a podium, but at eye level with the crowd that had gathered. They weren't there to be impressed. They were there to feel something real. His words, steady and unpolished, had pierced through the noise of metrics and market forecasts, cutting straight into the heart of a culture hungry for substance. Inside the building, Elon Musk stood alone in the green room, watching a muted live stream on a wall monitor. No matter how many times he tapped the screen or refreshed the feed, the same image played. Kennedy, surrounded by people, speaking calmly, passionately, while Elon's own keynote clip sat virtually unwatched. The contrast was devastating. His summit, designed to unveil the next frontier of human advancement, had been hijacked by something embarrassingly primal: decency. An assistant burst into the room, visibly rattled. "Sponsors are pulling out," she said. 3 major partners just issued public statements saying they're reevaluating their relationship with the event. Elon didn't respond. He just stared at the footage, his face a mixture of disbelief and growing dread. Another headline rolled across the monitor. "Senator Kennedy hijacks tech summit with one thing AI can't simulate: humanity." Outside, a journalist leaned in toward Kennedy and asked, "Senator, did you expect this reaction when you came here?" Kennedy gave a modest smile, adjusting the sleeves of his well-worn blazer. "I expected to give a quiet talk about ethics in innovation. I didn't expect to become an example of what happens when innovation forgets ethics altogether." The crowd murmured in agreement. A woman in her 20s stepped forward, her voice shaking. "I'm a UX designer. I've worked on products that hurt people without meaning to. I used to tell myself it was just my job. But now I feel like I have to ask better questions." Kennedy turned toward her, his eyes kind but direct. "Then that's where change begins," he said. "It's not about being perfect. It's about being awake." Behind them, the boy who had filmed the video stood near his mother, who had driven in from another city to see the man who once helped them keep their home. She watched Kennedy closely, and when their eyes met, she simply mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded, his face unreadable, but his posture carried the weight of her gratitude like a soldier carrying the flag. The energy of the gathering had shifted from outrage to momentum. A local musician had plugged a speaker into his van and quietly began playing acoustic guitar under the stars. What started as a flash moment of virality was morphing into something else, something slower, more powerful. Community. People weren't just filming anymore. They were talking, asking questions, sharing stories. A tech summit meant to launch the future had somehow stumbled backward into the most human experience imaginable. Back inside, Elon's PR team was in full damage control mode, drafting apologies, rehearsing empathy, plotting a podcast appearance to explain the misunderstanding. But the damage had already passed the point of PR. It wasn't about the shove anymore. It was about the silence that followed. The laughter, the dismissal, and the way the richest man in the room had failed to offer a hand until it was too late. Elon finally turned away from the monitor. "Cancel tomorrow," he said coldly. "The summit's over." The news hit the attendees fast. Notifications buzzed on phones. Emails confirmed the cancellation. But by then, no one seemed to care, because the real summit was still happening in the parking lot. When Kennedy finally stepped away, the crowd parted respectfully, letting him through like a tide around a rock. He didn't say goodbye. He simply raised a hand in quiet acknowledgement and walked off toward his car. But just as he reached for the door, a young woman chased after him. "Sir," she said, breathless, "are you going to do something with this? I mean, this moment, this energy, it's bigger than one night." Kennedy turned, considering her words carefully. "That depends," he said. "Are you going to do something with it?" She blinked, stunned. "Me?" He smiled, eyes twinkling. "Change doesn't wait for the perfect messenger. It starts with whoever's paying attention." She stood there, frozen, as his car pulled away and disappeared down the road. But in her pocket, her phone buzzed again. A new video, a new post, a new wave of people reacting not to anger, not to scandal, but to something they hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And that night, for the first time in the tech summit's decade-long history, no one remembered the pitch decks, or the charts, or the slideshows promising utopia. They remembered a man being pushed down, and the way he stood back up. The next morning, the world had changed. Not dramatically, not with fireworks or legislation, but with a quiet shift in how people saw things. The video of Senator John Kennedy being shoved, rising, and then speaking with grace had eclipsed even the biggest celebrity headlines. News anchors called it the defining moment of the year. Talk show hosts replayed the footage with disbelief. Podcasts analyzed it frame by frame. But for Kennedy, none of that mattered as much as what landed in his inbox. Thousands of emails poured in, not from politicians, not from media outlets, from people. A high school teacher who said she played the clip in class to start a conversation about courage. A janitor who said he'd never seen a powerful man carry himself with that kind of dignity. A robotics engineer who confessed he'd started coding because he wanted to change the world. But somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten what that actually meant. Kennedy sat at his kitchen table, his coffee going cold, reading every word. The internet had already crowned him a hero, but he didn't feel heroic. He felt responsible. Not for what happened to him, but for what he was supposed to do with it. The moment had gone viral, sure, but virality without direction was just noise. It was time to give it weight. That afternoon, he made 3 phone calls. The first was to the boy who filmed the video. He didn't call the media first. He called the kid. They talked for 20 minutes about what the boy saw, what he felt, and how it felt to stand up and record when everyone else stood still. Before hanging up, Kennedy said, "You didn't just capture a moment, you changed one. Don't ever forget that." The second call was to a local university. He offered to fund a new scholarship, one that wouldn't be based on GPA or test scores, but on acts of courage and integrity. The kind of character you can't measure on a spreadsheet. They agreed instantly. They named it the Grace Under Fire Fellowship. The third call was to a tech ethics group that had been struggling for funding. He didn't just donate. He asked to join their next meeting. Off the record, no press. Not to speak, to listen. Because he knew the real change wouldn't come from a single speech or summit. It would come from people who did the hard work when no one was watching. Meanwhile, Elon Musk released another statement. This time it was longer, carefully worded, apologetic in tone. But something was missing. The world saw through it. The public response was cold. Because while Kennedy had walked into that summit with nothing but quiet conviction, Elon had walked out of it with nothing but bruised pride. You can't code empathy. You can't download humility. That week, Kennedy gave no interviews. He turned down late-night shows and profile features. When asked why, his spokesperson said simply, he said everything he needed to say already. But people weren't done listening. At community centers, schools, even in workplaces, the video kept playing. Not just as entertainment, but as a case study in what it looks like to resist ego with grace, to fight back without raising a fist. It wasn't a political moment. It was a human one, a moment where the world saw that dignity isn't loud, but it echoes further than rage ever could. At a public Q&A weeks later, someone finally asked him, "What do you want us to do, Senator?" Kennedy paused, looked out at the crowd, and said, "Start by seeing the people no one else sees. The janitor, the delivery guy, the kid in the corner, the person you're tempted to overlook, acknowledge them, because how we treat people who can do nothing for us tells the world who we really are." The room was silent. But something in that silence felt different. It wasn't emptiness. It was readiness. He ended with a challenge. "If you were in that lobby," he asked, "and saw me fall, would you have looked away, or would you have hit record? Would you have spoken up? Think about it, because one day it won't be me on the floor, it'll be someone else, and the world will be watching again." And just before he stepped off the stage, he turned back one last time and said, "When that moment comes, be the person who doesn't flinch." And just like that, he left. Not with fireworks, but with a ripple that would carry through people long after the headlines faded. Because sometimes, the quietest man in the room ends up making the loudest noise. And if this story moved you, then maybe you're already part of that ripple.